Coming up on episode 155 of Creative Writing, I'm talking all about how to deal with your doubt.
I can't go back to sleep, it's almost light. These restless thoughts have kept me up again tonight.
Hello and welcome to Creative Writing. I'm Kirsten Oliphant, your host, and this is the podcast for you, a writer, blogger, or creative who wants to build an online platform without being smarmy. And I'm going to start off this episode actually giving a shout out to Jasmine Commerce, who does the music for the show. She's an indie artist. We went to college together and actually played at the same open mics, but I gave up and she did not. She persisted and is still doing music full-time in LA. You can find her at jasminecommercemusic.com. I've had some questions and sometimes I forget to mention her or I mention it at the end and you guys might miss it. So I just wanted to give her a shout out. She lent her music to the show and is a fabulous, fabulous musician, great music. So there's lots more where that came from if you go check out her website. Today, I want to talk about how to deal with your doubts. And I've been doing some really specific episodes that are very actionable. So this is a little bit more woo-woo and I'm not a very woo-woo person. If you know me, that's just not my thing. So yeah, I avoid these episodes, but every so often you just have to balance it, at least for me. So maybe my balance is like way more towards the practical with like a little woo thrown in, not even woo-woo, just a little woo. So that's what we're getting to today is talking about doubt. And the reason I wanted to address this is I've been, I hang out, I lurk in Facebook groups basically all day. That's all I do. If you're ever like, what does Kirsten do with her life? I'm in Facebook groups, just lurking around. But I've seen some posts from different authors and bloggers too, and podcasters who are expressing kind of this frustration and sort of this sense of feeling unworthy or feeling like they're not doing a good enough job or just that they're never going to get to where someone else is. And so I wanted to address this because this, I think, sometimes gets written off. Like I hear people kind of minimizing this and saying, oh, you've got imposter syndrome, or you haven't made it far enough yet to trust yourself and to stop having these doubts. And I get really frustrated when I see those comments because imposter syndrome is a real thing. And that's kind of when you feel like that sense that you don't belong, even though you do, like you feel like you're an imposter in whatever it is you're trying to do. Yeah, that's a thing. But doubts and having dark moments in your creative path is not something that only happens to, I guess, for lack of a better term, people who are like immature, quote unquote, or new, or, just starting out. This is not something that just starts and stops. It is something that plagues everyone. And I just want to address that. It's not something to minimize. It's not something to think, oh, well, you'll get there. Yeah. No, this is a journey and you're going to have different kinds of doubts all along the way. Wait, this is not encouraging. Hang on. Bear with me. You're going to have doubts along the way. So I hope it's encouraging in the sense that if you're feeling that way, you are not alone. So that's kind of what I wanted to say. So I don't want to just like put a wet blanket on everybody, like you're going to doubt forever, because it's not usually a consistent all the time thing. It comes and goes. So I want to give you guys some practical ways to deal with this. And I hope that it's an encouragement to you because I felt like when reading some of these posts, I wanted to address this. I still have doubts all the time, and I'm going to talk about some of my own and how I deal with them and give you some general suggestions because how I deal with them is probably not how it's going to work for you. It's all going to be different. So let's talk about how to deal with your doubts. And if you want to find the show notes for this, you can go to creativewriting.com/155 for episode 155. So how to deal with your doubts. The first thing that I think is really, really important is to check and see if you can identify the trigger. So can you figure out, is there a specific thing, a specific action, a specific moment that drew you into your doubt? And this is not always the case. However, I think a lot of times it is. I have struggled with depression and still struggle with depression off and on. Mine is very seasonal, generally seasonal. It's more seasonal than anything else. So when I moved to Texas, it literally cleared up an enormous amount of my depression, moving from Virginia to Texas. Because it's so flat in Houston, there's a lot more sky, there's a lot more light. The trees are tall, but because it's not hilly like it was in Virginia, there's just more light and they're not these dreary days, or there are very few of them in the winter. So that really helped a lot, but I still sometimes struggle with depression. And what I've started doing is when I have a low day or low days, I put a mark on the calendar just to say that. And it really helps me to understand, okay, did something happen? Was there an external thing that sort of triggered these feelings that then kind of led into my depression? Is it something that's hormonal? What is it? Is it the moon? It's not the moon. I don't check it against that. But just for example, I do check. I think it's important to categorize those things because sometimes you can see a pattern. And the same thing with your writing or your creative doubts. There might be something. Maybe it's looking at reviews and all of a sudden you're sent into a tailspin. Or maybe it's a particular Facebook group. I was involved in a writing community probably 6 years ago. And it was toxic. It was incredibly toxic. It was not a Facebook group. It was a group where we posted and shared stories through like a link up each week. And I just did not gel with this group. They did not like my writing. And I kept feeling like every week I needed to prove myself and constantly had this weird sense of rejection from this group and it just was not a good fit for me. And it became something that was really unhealthy. And I didn't like the way the leaders treated the other authors. And I've talked to other authors in this group and they felt the same way. So I'm sure for some people it was really good, but for a few of us, at least, it was toxic and we got out and we still talk to each other. But that was really triggering to me in a lot of ways because it brought on these doubts because it was coming from this sense of feeling rejected by this particular group. It just really hurt. And so that was a trigger. So if you can try to identify your trigger, that's a really important thing, is to find the cause if you can. Second, you're going to remove that trigger or adjust accordingly. So if you can remove it, and maybe it's not permanently, maybe it's just for a little while, maybe you need to take a step back, maybe you don't need to read reviews, maybe you need to leave that Facebook group permanently, whatever it is, do something that will get you separated from that trigger. And again, it may be a season, like maybe you can't handle reviews now, but you will be able to in 6 months. And you can always kind of dip your toe back in the water and see if it's okay later. But it is okay. It's okay to quit. It's okay to step away. It's okay to say, this is not healthy for me, and to leave. Totally fine. So if you can find the trigger, then you can remove or adjust. And then the third thing is to find support. And I think this is really, really key. And I think support can be a bigger group, but also maybe a few people that you talk to. So I have a lot of Facebook groups that I'm in. Obviously, I've already mentioned that I spend my day lurking in Facebook groups. The Creative Writing Facebook group is a fantastic place, but I also have a couple smaller groups that are like 20 people. And those were a little bit more open with each other because it's smaller and we trust each other more. And then I have a few friends that I message and we will either text each other or Facebook message each other and talk about things like our rank on Amazon and why that's frustrating to us, or this review or the email that we got, or the good things that are happening. And that support means so much because it's really nice to be able to go into a group or into a messenger and say, hey, this really stinks and I'm having a hard time with it. And to have somebody else either say, here are some encouraging words for you, or to say, I'm in the same place, and to know you're not alone. So look for some support. And this may take some time. You may not always get it right the first time. I think, I'm pretty hesitant to trust, to go deeper with people. But then when I do, I'm kind of all in. So I think it's okay to be slow and to kind of take some time to see if you can connect with people. And maybe an idea would be, if you're in a bigger Facebook group, and I will suggest, I think the Creative Writing Facebook community is fantastic. A lot of positive people. I've tried really hard to set the tone in there so that it is very positive and fun, not smarmy and not self-promoty and not rude like some Facebook groups, not negative. But maybe there are a few people you'll connect with in there and you guys can start connecting outside of the group as well, whether that's through Messenger or having a private little mastermind or accountability or whatever it is. So if you do want to check out our group, you can go to creativewriting.com/community. But try to find support, however that is. If you're hanging out on Instagram, if you're hanging out on Snapchat, whatever it is, if you like to talk on the phone, which is like the last thing I ever use my phone for is actual phone calls. Whatever it is, find some support for yourself. And maybe it's somebody outside the writing community who can just support you, but it's really nice to have those people who understand what you're going through. The next thing I want to say is to remind yourself of truths. And there's that whole cliched phrase that, when did this come about? Like 2 years ago, where people started talking about, I'm going to share my truth. I remember here, it's got to be longer actually, because I remember it in the office with Jim and Pam, but I've heard it so many other places. It's still being said where people need to tell their truth. But despite being a cliche, this is the time where you do need to tell yourself your truth, the truth, and not let your feelings run over you. So let me give an example of what I mean. So in January, you guys know in this series, I've been talking about this. A couple episodes ago, I shared how I went from making $30 last year on Amazon sales to making, this January, I made over 8,000. I think it was ended up being 8,600. And that was amazing. I was so excited. And for me, it felt like it should just go up from there. Well, February was a bad month. It was, okay. Well, you'll get to my truth in a second here. It felt like a bad month. I ended up making over $4,000. However, compared to my 8,600 the month before, it felt like a failure. And I was talking to Rob about this, my husband, and he was like, hey, wait, I'm sorry. What's going on? You're upset because you made over $4,000 writing books? And I was like, oh yeah. Yeah. And then I went and looked back, and that was like my third highest month ever. Because I'd been kind of coasting along, generally making about 3,000 every month, and then going a little bit up. And then I had a big month, and then I kind of went back to 3,000, and then I went to the 8,600, and then I went to 4,000. And so, it's not a failure, but it felt like a failure to me because my expectation was really high. And expectations really factor in, just as a side note, they really factor into this whole doubt and depression and having a hard time thing, because we sometimes put these very unrealistic expectations on ourselves. And we have these expectations because of what we see other people doing, and then we don't meet them, but we don't always know we have those expectations. So kind of going back for a second to those triggers, the trigger might be your expectation of yourself that needs to change. So just throwing that out there. But you might need to remind yourself of the truth. And so when I reminded myself that even though it felt bad, it felt like going backwards, having a month where I made over $4,000 was not a bad thing. I should be incredibly thankful. And I am. But again, I had these expectations on myself. I had these expectations of my income, and I felt like it should go up. It felt like a failure. And so I had to remind myself of the truth that it was not a failure, in fact. And we're going to have up and down months. I mean, that's the reality of Amazon and this world we're living in, especially if you're selling things online. It's really not predictable. I mean, it can be, but then, Amazon, what you got paid per month for pages read went down. A lot of people had a bad month in February. So that just goes to show people are like, oh, write romance books in February. Well, every romance author I know had a bad month in February. So, and bad is relative again. But remind yourself of the truth. And that can sometimes really help. And you may still feel bad about it, but the more you kind of tell yourself the truth of the situation, the easier it is to tell your feelings to take a hike. And then the last thing to help with your doubt is to take an action that's going to move you forward out of it. I don't know what that will look like for you. It depends on the doubt you're in. It depends on the triggers and so many things. But I'll tell you one of mine and how I have some action from it, or what action I take from it. So I have learned that I hit a low point every time I finish a book. I am a really good starter. I love starting things. And I did this when I was younger. I've actually done this my whole life. I have so many started books, so many, and so few until this year finished books. I'm really great at starting. And when I get to the middle and then towards the end, I start to slow down. And part of me wonders if it's because there's this icky feeling for me that comes with finishing. I know I should feel excited, and there's like a tiny bit of me that does. And then I go into this weird, inexplicable depression about it. I start to feel like I am a terrible author. I start to feel like whatever I finished, even though usually my favorite project at the moment, at any given moment, is whatever I'm working on. The minute I finish it, I'm sure that it's terrible. I am sure it is the worst thing I've ever written. No one's going to like it. It's awful, awful, awful. And I just go into this really terrible tailspin about it. And so once I started realizing that this was happening, and that I wanted to quit, I wanted to stop writing. Basically, every time I finished a book, I just felt terrible. Once I realized that that was a trigger, I found the action that really helped move through it, which is to dive immediately into the next book. In fact, sometimes I'll actually start the next book and not get too into it, but get a couple chapters in while I'm finishing that first book, so that the minute I finish, and I sometimes mean literally the minute, I will send it off I have a handful of beta readers, a little under 10 beta readers who look at it first along with my proofreader. And I'll send it to them. And the minute I hit send, I will open up that Word document and go to work on the next thing. Because for me, it doesn't allow me to wallow and feel that creative depression because it takes me right back into starting the next project, which I love. So for me, that's the action that I need to take to move forward out of my doubt and depression. And maybe that won't work forever. It works for right now. And so it may not be a forever solution, but figure out your right now solution. Figure out your right now. Maybe it's not a solution. Maybe it just makes it better. Maybe it takes the edge off. Maybe it just helps you to start taking those steps to move forward. But whatever it is, consider what kind of actions you could take. And maybe it'll take some testing. It took me a few books in to realize that I needed to do this, because what I did before, the first couple books I wrote last year, I would finish a book, go through this depression, and then not write for like 3 days. And I would turn on Netflix and I would sit around and wallow and I would eat ice cream and drink wine and like just be a sad sack essentially about it. And then I would kind of like kick myself in the pants. But now I move almost seamlessly into the next thing. And I kind of skip over this period of depression, creative depression. So that is something for you to look for and just test and try and see if you can figure out what action, however weird it may be, helps you. And I'm going to give another example, talking about how weird it may be. In college, I had a friend named Jenny, and she and I led a Bible study together. And when she was struggling with kind of believing what the Bible said about her, or what God said about her in the Bible, about her being loved and cherished and all of these things, when she was struggling with that, she would do this really weird thing where she would stand on a chair and shout Bible verses that proclaimed the truth of what God said to her. So it's sort of like telling your truth, but it was also taking this action. And she said a couple of times roommates would walk in and then be like, okay, peace out, and walk back out. But for some reason for her, this was a really empowering thing to get higher up and to be a little bit loud about it and to proclaim these truths that she believed when she wasn't feeling them, and it helped her feel them. So don't like put yourself in a box and think that you have to do some kind of like thing that you see on a blog. I don't know how you find these things that help, but you might be surprised. But try some things. So again, I want to leave you with this. We all struggle with doubt. I'm still struggling with doubt in different ways. Now that I'm a year in and have had success more than I thought I would have, I still have doubt. I still have doubt every month, every book, every day. I'm in there trying to figure out, if something will go wrong, or I'll get a bad review, or I get an email that I don't like. And those do outweigh the great emails that you get. It's just really hard sometimes to deal with those things, whatever it is. And sometimes it's just not even outside forces. It's just myself. It still happens, and it is not a sign that you are immature. It is not a sign that you don't know what you're doing. It's not a sign that you need to get over your imposter syndrome. It's a thing that just happens, okay? And it happens to us all, and I think it happens up and down throughout your career as a creative. So you're not alone. Find some support. Identify the triggers, remove the things you need to remove, remind yourself of the truth, whether you're standing in a chair or not, and then take some kind of action to move yourself forward. So I hope this is encouraging to you. This is the most woo-woo will be for a while, but I need to hear this. And so maybe you're at that place today, whether you're listening when I'm actually publishing this in March of 2019, or if you're listening in the future, hey future, whenever you're listening to it, I hope it finds you at just the right spot. Thank you so much for listening. And again, the show notes are at creativewriting.com/155. If you want to join our wonderful and not toxic community, you can go to creativewriting.com/community. And if you want to join my weekly email where you'll get the updates about the podcast episode, plus you'll get tips, news, resources, and more, you can go to creativewriting.com/quick fix. Thanks again to Jasmine Commerce of JasmineCommerceMusic.com. And thanks to all of you guys who are listening and who have provided encouragement to me. I feel like I've had more encouragement in the last week than I've had in a long time, both about my writing and the podcast. So thank you guys for all of the kind words and all of those things. I really love what I do, and I love knowing that you are on the other side listening. So with that said, go out and create content that you love and serve your people well.